Marcel. I write a blog, Lesson on Gems, and today we're going to talk about one of my new favorite books, which is The Bridge Over Dwina by Ivo Andrić. This is so amazing. It's just a book about a bridge over Dwina. Or more specifically, it's a book that depicts the lives of the people around this bridge, which is a real bridge, from it was built in the 1500s until it was bombed in the 1914, so the start of the First World War. And this isn't going to be a review of the book. That's something you find on my blog, but this book made me want to talk about something that's quite near and dear to my heart, which is historical accuracy. And it started by a quote which I read from the introduction of this book. And I'm now going to read the quote for you. Andrić's story of how the bridge was built is completely historical. A Bosnian peasant's son, Muhammad Sokolu, ne Sokolović, became Grand Vizier in 1565 and as such governed the empire until his death in 1579. Having been recruited into the Sultan's service as a youth, he remembered well his Bosnian birth, and among other acts acknowledging his origins, he chose his own blood brother to become patriarch of the Serbian Church. The construction of the bridge across the Drina was another similar act of emanating from the Grand Vizier's desire to be remembered in the place of his birth. Here's an issue I then have. While the building of the bridge is depicted in the book, that's the first thing that happens, that's not exactly how it's described in the book. I'm very sorry, I'm now going to say a lot of names wrong and using a cheat sheet. And I apologize for that. I've done my best. But, so the bridge was actually built by the Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, which the bridge is named after. And he was born to a Bosnian Christian family and was taken as part of Devshme. Yeah. Devshme was a tax put on the Christian families in the Ottoman Empire, where they had to simply just give a certain percentage of their sons to the empire. So they would then be taken from their family down to Turkey and raised to do their job for the empire, pretty much. And this was to happen with the vizier. And he did build the bridge, but his brother is not mentioned in the book. And neither is the bridge actual architecture, which was court architect Mimar Sinan. And he has been replaced by two other characters, Abidaja and Maestro Antonio. So here you can see him starting mixing facts and fiction. So he's describing something that actually happened and bringing in some of the actual people that was involved, but both embellishing and yet ignoring certain facts. For example, while the introduction talks about how the Grand Vizier wanted to build this bridge to be remembered, the book describes it as more of the Vizier having what I read as PTSD symptoms from childhood trauma, which kidnapping is childhood trauma, and then wanting to build this bridge to get rid of the symptoms, which it actually does. And that's the issue here, the sort of the embellishment of historical fact in a fictional book. Because this isn't promoted as a non-fiction historical book, but is very often talked about as a non-fiction historical book, or treated as a non-fiction historical book. And the book has been described as a series of short stories held together by simply being placed in this one spot, which is the bridge and the towns and people living around this bridge. And I absolutely buy that, and I think that's a brilliant way of actually describing it. For example, there is the story about a woman who kills herself in the book. And I can buy the fact that while the story of the woman killing herself is made up, the historical facts around this woman and what this woman represents is historical accurate. Because Ivo Endrich isn't just anyone, he's not just an author, he actually got a doctorate in 1924. And the name of his doctorate was The Development of the Spiritual Life of Bosnia Under Influence of Turkish Sovereignty. And we know that he grew up in Visegrad. He grew up playing on this bridge before it was bombed. This is a part of what he knows. And he has the academic aspect to back up. So it's not just about telling a story from where he grew up. He has both. And I've studied history. I've studied cultural history. And I think that's one of the reasons why I absolutely fell in love with this book. Because this book is so good at showing cultural history, at showing how the people and the culture the people create in a certain spot both continues but also changes. How you have changes that happens from within, but you also have changes coming outwards that changes the structures within a certain place. I honestly feel that this is one of the most historical accurate books that I've ever read. And it's not a non-fiction historical book. And so the way he writes his book, the setup doesn't bother me. I don't care that the woman who kills herself isn't real, because the setup and what she represents is real. And Ivo Andrić said that he didn't call this book a novel. He called it a chronicle, which is a brilliant way of talking about it, which shows that it's not, the details aren't real, but the details aren't what's important. It's the essence. And the details are created to show off the essence, to show off the essence of the people who lived around this bridge. So why am I talking about this? Why am I sitting here, besides the fact that I'm saying that if you have found any of what I have talked about to remotely interesting, go and read this book, because it's so wonderful. Why am I talking here? Because of the beginning and the ending. Because there is two stories that we know are based on historical facts. The bridge was built and the bridge was bombed. And I'm sitting here and thinking, does that matter? Does it matter that these are actual things that happened by real people who actually lived? Because you might sit there and say, but of course, this is a fiction book. You shouldn't take what this book writes as true. That's what it means with it being fictional. And I would agree with you, with one exception. I am weird. I fact check fictional books. So I will look up who actually built this bridge and know that it's not the two characters described in the book, but a third character not mentioned. And I don't know how many people actually do that. I know that there aren't a lot of people who actually do that, because I've heard so many times people talk about facts that they've learned or seen or read through fictions, either books or films, which when you talk about the sources, they of course no, of course that's not true, it's fiction, of course you have to take everything with a grain of salt. But when you're talking just about the actual events, they will say these as facts. So the reality is that when he writes the building of the bridge the way he does with these two characters, most likely one of two things will happen. One, people will think that there were two architects to the bridge, but that the stories he presents is an embellishment. Or two, that we don't know who the architect of the bridge was, and therefore we've created these two characters and had an embellishment around them. And while Mimar Sinan isn't what's important to this story, he was still a real person who did this very real thing. And I guess the question I just want to throw out there into the internet, because I'm not really sure what I think right now, is how much do you, or how much should you, fact check your fiction? Leave your comments down below. And remember, it's better to be a witty fool than a foolish wit.